Bedlam is likely a word that you're familiar with. Although it usually refers to a highly chaotic circumstance, the word implies more than just turmoil. The word bedlam conjures up an unstable, out of control environment. This is very appropriate given the development of the term Bedlam as a moniker for Britain's most infamous mental asylum. To give it its official name, the Bethlem Hospital was a well-known landmark in London that, throughout the course of its erratic, centuries-long history, not only gave the city a dread-inspiring repository for its darkest anxieties, but also served as the ideal example of how alarming the line between sane and insane used to be. Hello, everybody. It's Dom, and welcome to this week's episode of Horror House. Before we get started, as always, please take this as your reminder that you are an amazing human being doing amazing things. You are beautiful inside and out. You're awesome in so many ways, and the fact that you're here means you're pretty goddamn cool for one. But it also means that you're continuing to support us, and we love you for it. We love your support. We never take it for granted. So thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to this episode. So as you can see, it is just me today. Amy is taking a well-earned break. I mean, that's what she says. Really, she just doesn't want to record for you people. You people. I'm joking. She is taking a well-earned break. She is currently at home in Scotland. So I am taking this episode solo today. Please do remain. Please do keep listening. Please don't leave. It's a pretty interesting subject that I will be talking about today. It's not a true crime case. We have been doing things that aren't true crime recently, so we've done a couple of paranormal episodes. This one is about a old, well, not old, it still exists, but an old as in it's existed for a long time. Mental asylum, insane asylum, mental hospital, however you want to frame it, in good old Britain. So it's quite an interesting place. So I hope that you stick around. Before we get into that, however, I just want to say a massive thank you, and I'm sure Amy would also say thank you if she was here, but she is probably saying thank you with me in spirit, for the love that our Amityville episode has got on YouTube. I don't know what it's at now. It's at like 700 and something views. It's got like nearly 20 likes. It's by far our best performing YouTube episode. I think we've gained like 20 subscribers from that one episode. So if you're a new subscriber, thank you. If you've given it a thumbs up, thank you. And just, it was so unexpected. I was just looking at the YouTube studio, and it was just going up and up and up. It was popping off. So yeah, it's pretty surreal, but also thank you, because it's pretty cool. That's enough of me rambling. Let's get into the case of Bedlam, shall we? Or to give it its official name, Bethlem Royal Hospital. So Bethlem was established in the 13th century as a priory honouring St. Mary of Bethlehem, like many other medieval hospitals. By the year 1400, it had evolved into a medieval hospital, hospital, which at the time simply meant, quote, a refuge for strangers in need, rather than providing medical care as you would expect from a typical hospital of nowadays. Its intake inevitably contained many vulnerable individuals who were labeled as insane. And I use air quotes for insane because remember, children, at this time period, if you so much as sneezed, you would probably be chucked in a mental asylum for it, because they would say that the devil was trying to escape. It crawled up your anus and is now trying to escape from your nose. Sorry about that picture. Enjoy. But yes, what constituted as insane in this time period is very different to what you would class as insane, in the 21st century. So just keep that in mind. By the end of the 14th century, the hospital had established its reputation as a specialized mental asylum for persons with mental health disorders. Bethlem would have been at the forefront of mental health care because it was the only facility of its kind in Britain at the time. And I say would have because, it's the 14th century. And treatment for mental disorders in asylums during this time period, and, even in this, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, was interesting, shall we say. Sadly, the forefront of mental health care in medieval Britain involving treating mental illnesses like physical disorders by bleeding, blistering, defecating, and making patients vomit, quote, melancholic humours out of their bodies. It goes without saying that these treatments, which were used for centuries, would frequently end in death. One of the methods of ridding a patient of the, quote, melancholic humours was rotational therapy, which was created by Erasmus Darwin. Yes, Charles Darwin's grandfather. It would have often comprised of placing the patient on a chair suspended from a beam by ropes tied to its legs. The chair would then be rotated 20 to 40 times in one direction before being let go and then being allowed to spin back to its starting position. It's like a really crappy roller coaster. So yeah, that doesn't sound particularly fun. Like, I like roller coasters, don't get me wrong, but I don't think I would want to be tied in a chair and then spun like that. Yeah, I'm good. I am good. It's believed that this treatment would effectively clear the intestines, bladder, and stomach, as well as leave an impression on the organs of sensibility, which is the brain and the nervous system. I mean, it's an effective way to make something come out. Absolutely. I'm not sure if there would be any melancholic humours that would come out. I think it would just be more projectile vomit that would be ejected, to be honest. In addition, it was believed that this treatment would create a restful slumber in a patient, similar to rocking a baby to sleep. Not sure I buy that comparison, but hey, I suppose being gently rocked to sleep and being spun in a chair until you projectile vomit is pretty much the same thing, right? Right. In the 1680s, Bethlem instituted cold bathing as a means of shocking patients out of their mental sickness. I don't mean to laugh. I'm not laughing at mental illness. I'm laughing at the fact that treatments like these were looked at as steadfast ways to treat mental illness. It's baffling. To be honest, it's crazy. When you look at this in like 2023 eyes or 21st century eyes, it's wild. Absolutely wild. Patients could be sprayed with cold water, submerged in cold water for an extended period of time, or wrapped in ice soaked cloths. Inspectors from the 16th century declared Bethlehem unfit after conditions had deteriorated so drastically. By the 17th century, the term Bedlam had entered the general lexicon and had become a chillingly satirical byword for the horrors that may await one who is unfortunate enough to be admitted to Bedlam Hospital, um, Bethlem Hospital, or Bedlam Hospital. Either way, it's applicable. When the hospital's second iteration was built in 1676, it was unlike any asylum that had ever been built. And with the preceding building being a cramped hovel with an open drain running through it, the need to upgrade was quite painfully obvious. Its 540 foot long or 165-meter facade was designed by Robert Hooke, a city surveyor, natural philosopher, and Christopher Wren's assistant. And he was inspired by Louis XIV's Tuileries Palace in Paris. For any French listeners, sorry if I've absolutely destroyed that. I'm sorry. Please don't go. Please stay. It overlooked manicured gardens with walkways bordered by trees. The entire impression was not that of an asylum, but rather the lavish Versailles estate of the French king. I'm so sorry, French people that are listening, if you are listening. There are any French people listening. I do apologize. Please do let me in to your country soon so I can go to Disneyland Paris. I've got a trip coming up. Please don't make me cancel it. But yeah, that sounds fancy, right? Fancy. Better than a building with a sewer that's running through it, essentially. This daring new iteration of Bethlehem, which some refer to as a palace for lunatics, was intended to be a sign of civic pride and compassion, representative of a community that was working hard to reinvent itself. Bethlem's magnificence, however, turned out to be entirely fictitious. The lavish facade of the building was so weighty that it immediately would start to crumble, exposing the residents to substantial leakage. It even turned out that the hospital, which was built on the London Wall's ruins, lacked sufficient foundations. In reality, it was hardly more than a weak facade, and the building's blatant superficiality was entirely plain to see. And on that note, let's take a quick break before we talk about what conditions inside the walls of Bethlem were really like. Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of this week's episode, all about Bethlem Hospital, or Bedlam, to give it its unofficial moniker. We've talked about the history and the beginnings of the hospital. It's moved to a new building, which is already crumbling, so that's going particularly well. So let's talk about what conditions inside the walls of Bethlem were like. In its huge, creakily stunning new form, Bethlem attracted morbid curiosity from the public and offered its governors a tempting opportunity to make money. In exchange for a small entrance fee, guests were welcome to visit Bethlem and gawk at its inhabitants. The foremost mental hospital in Britain had effectively turned into a public attraction, second only to St. Paul's Cathedral in terms of popularity. Rather than walking the perfectly kept grounds or taking in the elaborate architecture, people wanted to see the crack-brained patients that resided there. Anybody for as little as a penny was welcome to enter the wards of the hospital in order to stare at, taunt, or abuse the inmates. And it's wild how that was even acceptable. Like, that was seen as a day out for the family. Like, not, oh, let's go for a picnic in the park. Let's go and walk around the grounds. Let's go for afternoon tea. No, none of that. Let's go to the mental hospital and taunt and rile up the patients. That's a good day out. It's a good and it only cost a penny. It's a bargain, absolute bargain. The governors of Bethlehem utilised their tremendous power to keep the hospital away from public scrutiny. This would work for a time until reform activist Edward Wakefield and a small group of MPs were allowed entry into Bethlem's wards in 1814. The Bethlem staff had been rejecting the visit for weeks, and it would become quite clear why they would be rejecting the visit for weeks. The interior of the facility lacked hot water and was cold, dingy, and dark. In the parts that were at least habitable, MPs discovered a number of people shackled to beds or walls in small, fetid quarters. Patients' limbs were found to be crippled with cold and subject to injury by the raving patients with whom they were chained. The sight of James Norris, who was characterized as a clear and coherent man, being firmly shackled by his neck to an iron bar in the wall, struck the committee the most. After a decade of imprisonment, Norris reported that his muscles were atrophying and aching, and that he was wearing more metal restraints on his chest, waist, feet, and wrists. Norris, according to the staff, was violent and dangerous, but according to the MPs, he appeared calm and possibly even sane, and he probably, there was probably a good chance that he was sane. He just might have had depression, or he might have had anxiety, something like that, and they were like, "No, you're insane, mate. Off to Bedlam. Let's chain you to the pipe. Yeah, pipe down. Like, you're insane. You'd say we're going to stamp it on your wrist." Having seen enough, the inspectors would demand a parliamentary inquiry to take place. I think I would have done it way before this point, though saying that, it was the public that were allowed in because it became essentially a tourist attraction. And, I think that this was the first time that, MPs or inspectors or people that weren't paying public were allowed in. So it's a shame that it took this long. But it's the attitudes of the time, like I said, people paid to see this because, during this time period, this was acceptable conditions for people to live in an insane asylum. This was par for the course. The medical personnel fared pretty poorly during the investigation, with the pharmacist blaming others for the squalor and the chief physician, Thomas Monroe, contending that nothing the MPs had observed was wrong. Yeah, absolutely nothing was amiss at Bethlem Hospital. Absolutely nothing. It was state of the art. Everything was run perfectly. Yeah, nothing wrong with this place. Absolutely nothing. Bethlem's medical staff would be dismissed, but the hospital's governors, not ones to let their power be usurped, immediately appointed Edward Monroe, yes, Thomas Monroe's son, as the new head physician. Reformers were, unsurprisingly, not exactly pleased with this act of defiance, but the House of Lords refrained from taking action to put Bethlem under government control. The jarring contrast between Bethlem's opulent exterior and the decaying disaster that was its interior, that its needy occupants were compelled to live in became more and more obvious. The cost of maintaining this crumbling civic edifice was deemed financially imprudent, and it was eventually demolished in 1815. But was that the end of Bethlem? Absolutely not. It it doesn't die. it just keeps coming on back. Lessons had been learnt, and the combination of a new structure and new staff members brought about much needed adjustments in its brand new building in St George's Fields, south of the River Thames. Patients were described as clean, amply supplied with wholesome provisions, and well clothed, with none under restraint, in a report from 1818. Although patient care and finances had improved, individual issues would still persist, as seen in the 1830 finding of apothecary Edward Wright being intoxicated in the female galleries with his clothing dishevelled. When asked what Wright's responsibilities were, a co-worker responded, quote, smoking and opening and taking off the heads of the dead patients occasionally. It turned out that Wright had established his own laboratory in the hospital's basement due to his Frankenstein-like fixation with the dead. Wright's secret was out, and he would be immediately dismissed. Big yikes. big yikes. Yeah, get old Wright out. Jesus Christ. These incidents, along with 2 further financial scandals, did not directly concern the treatment of the patients. As a result, Bethlem was free from laws enacted in 1828, 1832, and 1845, and was able to carry on operating outside of the law. Reformers continued to raise their voices in opposition until Bethlem's protection from external scrutiny would be finally lifted in 1853. The hospital had finally lost its independence after more than 6 centuries. This would draw a line under the notoriety of Bethlem and made sure that going forward, the hospital wouldn't be associated with terror and dread it was for so long associated. William Charles Hood, the superintendent from 1852 to 1862, also did a great deal to improve conditions at the hospital. His goal was to develop real rehabilitation programs that the hospital's patients, not the administrators, would benefit from. Hood also advocated for keeping criminally institutionalized people apart from the mentally ill patients. For his contributions to this position, he would eventually be knighted. Bethlem Royal Hospital would be relocated once more in 1930, this time to Beckenham in Kent. Happily, its modern incarnation as a cutting-edge psychiatric hospital serves as a stark example of just how far mental health care has come from or since the dark days of Bedlam. And that is the story of Bethlem Royal Hospital, Britain's foremost mental institution. It's wild, just medieval views on, mental health and, and even, Victorian views, even into the 1900s, like I say, it was still mental institutions or mental hospitals or insane asylums, whatever you want to call them, the conditions were still so bad. And obviously Bethlem was not a place that you would want to be for a long time, up until at least, the mid to late 1800s. It was a better time then than it was, but it's got a dark history. It's got a very dark history, but it's a fascinating place. This was this was sort of scratching the surface of the hospital. I do encourage you to, to hop on the internet and look at, articles and look at other sources that talk about the hospital, because it's a fascinating building. It's got a fascinating history, a dark history. But if you're like me, if you're like Amy, and considering you listen to us, I'm assuming that you are, and you love a bit of morbid history, then it's quite a fascinating subject to read up on. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I haven't done a solo episode in a long time. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully it wasn't so dull to listen to, and hopefully, you learned something. And, if it means that you go and look further into the history of, Bedlam, Bethlam, whatever you want to call it, then that's very cool. But if you enjoy what we do, please support us. And there are a variety of ways that you can do that. You can rate and review. So you can rate on Spotify. You can review on the website or on Apple Podcasts. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like I said, please subscribe, please share. Also, please follow the Instagram page at horrorhouse_pod. And of course, please follow us on your podcast app of choice, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, whatever it may be. Please follow us on whatever podcast platform it is that you use to listen. If you want to support us financially, there is the Buy Me a Coffee link. We are always and forever struggling content creators. And a coffee would be very appreciated. So if you want to support us financially, you can buy us a coffee or 2 coffees or 3 coffees. We would very much appreciate that. But until next time, my friends, all that's left to say from me is, as always, stay spooky.